This is our last lesson for Chapter 6, 6.7. It is about simple interest. Interest is a good thing or a bad thing. If you're borrowing money, that means you have to pay a little extra. If you have money, that means you can make interest on your money. Simple interest is just a simple formula, the easiest formula that I know of to calculate interest. The principal is the amount of money that you're going to start with. So if you put money into your savings account, that's the amount deposited. And if you're borrowing money, how much did we borrow? So here's our formula. Interest equals principal times your rate times your time. Your rate is always like your percentage rate, and then your time is always in terms of years. And that is important because if they tell us like 6 months, then, well, that's 6 out of 12. So that we would use a decimal for that because it's half of a year. So be careful with your year. All right, let's get started with example 1. All right, on our homework, we're going to use the formula I equals PRT. You are going to be given, so there's 4 variables. We are going to be given 3 out of the 4, and then we have to solve the equation for our missing variable. The interest right now is our unknown. We do not know how much interest, but let's say we put $300 into a savings account at 4%. Now 4%, we're going to be using our calculators today, so I want to write that as a decimal. So 4% as a decimal, and then the time is 2 years. Since it's in years, I just get to use the number 2. Now, I just saw multiply those 3 numbers together. So when I take 300 times 400ths times 2, I get $24. So what that means is if I put $300 in my savings account at 4% interest for 2 years, I'm going to make $24 on that $300. So my total balance at the end of the 2 years is going to be $324. So some questions might ask you for the interest. Some questions might ask you for your ending balance, what I would consider my total. For our second example, we are going to use the same formula, I equals PRT, but this time our interest is given and our principal is the unknown. So if my interest, I'm going to substitute that in for I, 120. My rate, remember we want to write our rate as a decimal. Oops, my percentage was my unknown, so I'm just going to leave that as a P. And I'm going to times it by my percentage rate as a decimal, and then times 5 years. Okay, that's not pretty, but I have everything down. So my interest is 120, my principal is unknown, my percentage rate is 6%, and my time is 5 years. So now that I have to solve a multiple step equation, what first I'm going to look for is what I know on this side. I can still multiply my 600ths times 5. Knowing that 6 times 5 is 30, I just have to move my decimal over, so it would be 30/100ths. And I still have my times P equals 120. So I multiply what I know, and then I'm ready to divide, because that is my inverse operation. So I'm going to divide by 30/100ths, which means I have to divide by 30/100ths on the other side. So those cross simplify or divide out to be 1. And then my principal, if I take 120 divided by 3/10, I would get 400. Okay, so my principal is your starting balance. So that means we started with 400. If they happen to ask, well, what is your ending balance? Whoops. My total there we go, would be 400 plus the 120, how much I made on interest. So my $400 turned into $520. So those are a little bit harder. Now I have your practice problem set up for you. It's going to be just like our first example in example 1, where we are solving for our interest. So if you want to pause the video and see what you get and come back and compare it to mine. I'm going to start out with our interest formula. I equals PRT, principal, rate, and time. The interest is unknown, so I can leave that be. The principal is 500 times our rate as a decimal would be 0.02, and then our time is 1 year, which we all know what happens when we multiply by 1. So this one, all I need to do is multiply 500 times 2 hundredths, and 5 times 2 is 10, and then these two zeros and those two place values kind of cancel each other out, so I'm left with 10 maybe. So if I start out with $500, I leave it in an account for 1 year at 2%, I'm going to make a whopping $10. I don't know how to erase that, but that is interest. Is $10. So interest is $10. That means my total at the end of the 1 year would be $510. Make sure you read each story problem to know what you're solving for, interest or ending balance. Let's try another practice problem. For your second practice problem to try on your own, this time we're going to be solving for the rate. So when you get your answer, just as a heads up, your answer will be a decimal and you convert it to a percentage. Okay, so go ahead and pause and see what you come up with. All right, substituting the information we know. We just plug everything in, our interest, our principal, our rate is unknown, so I leave the R, and the time is 2 years. Just like we did on that second part of example 1, I am going to multiply what I know. So I know the 4,000 and I know the 2 years. So I just double my 4,000 and I still do not know my rate. So I leave the R. So my first step in this multiple step equation is to multiply what we know on the same side of the equal sign. So that's why I did the 2 and the 4,000. Now I'm ready to do my inverse operation, and that is to divide. So taking 240 divided by 8,000, I hope you see that that's going to be an itty bitty number, and that's why I warned you you would get a decimal. So our rate on our calculator shows us 300ths. Converting to a percentage, I go boom boom, and my percentage rate is 3%. And for our grand finale, we have a story problem. With story problems, I mean, you just have to read the story problem to dig out that information that I've been giving you all day today. So I'm going to be looking for what is my interest, what is my principal, what is my rate, and what is my time. So Avery deposits $6,000 into an account. So she deposited that, so that is her principal. That is how much she is starting with. She earns 4%, so that is my rate. You can write that down as a decimal if you want. So I got 2 out of the 4. How long will it take for her total amount in this account to reach a total, of 6,800. So this one does add a little bit of a challenge because we're solving for the time. It says how long. So we're solving for the time. But does it give us the interest? Not technically. But if I started out with 6,000 and right now I'm at 6,800, that means I made $800 in interest. See how I got that? Just subtract it. So now I have 3 out of the 4 pieces of our puzzle. So going back to our simple interest formula, I'm going to plug in everything that I know. Principal, 6,000, times our 4% interest rate, and then times our unknown amount of time. All right, solving this 2-step equation, I'm going to multiply what I know on the right side of my equation. And I know 6 times 4 is 24, right? So 2 decimals there, 3 zeros. I get 240 times t equals our $800 we made in interest. Now we're ready to divide 240 on both sides of our equal sign. And we're ready to divide, and we get 3.3 years. So 3 1/3 years. So it would take us over 3 years to make $800 if we start with 6,000.